All right, Beryl, take it away.
All right. So happy to be with you tonight. I was joking with a few of you that I am always a little careful accepting invitations when I know that the group is either angry with the newspaper or extremely aligned one way or the other politically, because there's a lot of landmines I would have to make sure I don't step on. But I was assured that you are a friendly, welcoming audience. And if not, I can roll with that too. So, but I want to thank you all. And what I wanted to do was just start really quickly with just kind of give you some background about where we are as a news organization, how we've evolved a little bit, because I think it'll help frame the discussion a little bit. So I have a few slides, and we'll go through that really quickly, and then I want the rest of this just to be a discussion Q&A. You can ask me anything. I'll just kind of tee it up. I did get an email from a member of your group who can't be here live tonight, but wanted to send some questions ahead of time, and they were very thought provoking. So if you're slow to come up with questions, I can seed the discussion with a couple of her questions. But let me just jump right in. Well, first, a little bit about myself. So I'm a Cincinnati guy, moved here to start sixth grade, grew up in Forest Park, graduated from Forest Park High School when it was still Forest Park High School. It is now Winton Woods High School. It merged, the school district merged its high schools, and now goes by the name Winton Woods. Went to the University of Cincinnati, started with the Enquirer. Shortly after college, I did a couple small newspaper stops, and then left, staying with the parent company. I had the opportunity to be my first editor-in-chief assignment was out west in Reno, Nevada. Enjoyed that a lot, and then went to USA Today for almost 6 years before coming back to the Enquirer as editor. I have never been in my career working for a news organization or newspaper that wasn't navigating through transition. It's just been a part of the gig the whole time I've been working in news, especially rapidly, I would say, late 90s, early 2000s, with the way digital news and information, the internet changed, the technology changed a lot of the way we consume media, not just news. Just think about the last time you watched a movie at home. You didn't go to Blockbuster and physically get a VHS. You're probably streaming it, and no matter what category of information, news or otherwise, we have the business of what we do has been disrupted. So we've always been changing and evolving, and I just kind of want to show you where we are now, where we have ended up. So let me share my screen. Hopefully, it's been a while since I've used Zoom. And it's asking me to update my preferences, so I'll do that. And I'm waiting. So we'll try this again. There we go.
There
All
we
right.
go.
There you go. So I often joke, and stealing a quote from Mark Twain, that reports of our death have been greatly exaggerated. When I tell people what I do, they respond almost like I've had a death in the family, like, oh, I hear things are rough. And that's largely because despite how we've evolved into a digital platform primarily, we still have the daily newspaper. And it is not what it used to be when that was the single platform that we had. Um, the digital disruption really took a toll on what we all think about when we think of a really like robust newspaper. And so people still measure our health, measure who we are by that printed product, which is just one of the platforms we have. And the platform that is not growing, by the way, year over year. We see decline in print readership, but not total readership. So here's some things that you might not know, just four quick things. We do have a growing audience. And when we used to measure just print audience, we would do it in terms of print circulation, which at the peak was about 100,000 daily and close to 200,000 Sunday print copies distributed, either home delivery or single copy through retailers. And so the reach we have digitally is bigger than that print audience ever was. The challenge is monetizing it, which I'll get into it in a minute. And this is changing too. The way people access us online used to be what we would call through the front door. They would come right to Cincinnati.com or Enquirer.com. Both URLs take you there and select stories to read, just like they would if you pick up a print newspaper and go through it. Now people are engaging us on the article level, and they're arriving at us not through the front door by going to Cincinnati.com, but because we've had to integrate with their digital life. So we call that referring traffic. And the pie chart shows you that most of it's coming from search and social. And we've seen a huge shift in the last couple of years away from what we would call the desktop web to mobile web, meaning 81% of our audience is accessing us this way, not a computer, not print, but through their phones, which has changed the way we think about delivering news and information. We can't treat it as a passive activity where people subscribe, may or may not pick up and read us when they have time. We have to engage in their digital day. And we do that again in a much different way than we ever went to market in the past. So I talked about the business model. Advertising used to rule the day. Even when we had people pay for home delivery, that was the loss leader. The cost of ink, paper, presses, trucks, delivering it to the driveway. Jeff Bezos talks about solving the last mile when it comes to delivery on a wide scale. And Kroger is trying to figure out the last mile when it comes to delivering groceries. For most of the entire century, newspapers have been taking that last mile, the last block, and delivering. But that charge, what that cost was never passed on to consumers, which will be important in a second. It was a very traditional model of advertising. You buy space in the printed product, we put your ad here, and you're exposed to that readership. Now we are trying to shift that to have people pay for the content. What is local news and information worth to you? Because we were either delivering it free online, which free is a terrible business model, or not when it comes to print, again, treating it as a loss leader, because advertising, especially classified advertising, which was the first advertising segment to totally be disrupted. It started with Craigslist, and think about what classified advertising used to be, especially private party. I've lost my dog. I want to sell my dining room table set. I need someone to cut my grass. All of that takes place now either through Facebook Marketplace or other types of, very specific niche digital platforms that are frankly way more efficient than we ever were that way. So the notion that this information we provide is either free or at very small cost we've had to overcome to monetize our content. So we're still in the advertising business. We deliver a lot of digital advertising, but that's pennies to the dollar compared to what we used to command for print advertising. So we've had to offset it with monetizing the content through subscriptions and some other things. So that's the business model we are now, is shifting to a paid content model. We've had tremendous growth in this regard, and this is where when people ask, how are you doing? If we were a digital startup that was showing the growth we have in both revenue and audience, this is paid digital only subscriptions, not print subscribers that also activate their digital subscriptions, but just digital only. And I'm proud to say that in Cincinnati, in this market, we've seen just about as strong a growth in paid digital only subscriptions than across the country. There's a tremendous appetite for local news and information here, and we're closing in on 40,000 digital only subscriptions, which was prior, I'd say go back just 5 years, and none of the content that we served online was being monetized in this way. So if we were a digital startup instead of a legacy media platform, Wall Street would be, singing our praises. But we're being measured against our legacy business, which has been in decline. So premium content, there's just a snapshot of some of the things that we mark for subscribers only. About half of our content is behind this paywall. If it's, weather or kind of breaking news or anything that would be important for public safety, that is all free. Some of the trending content we do, where we're competing against multiple news outlets, game scores, things like that. But if it requires expertise, investment of time, pulling public records, attending meetings, some of the things that are, especially broadcast competition, does not have the time or the resources to do. We're starting to mark that for subscribers only with different types of models. And here's just a snapshot of what I mean when I say premium content or content that's for paid subscribers. We no longer claim to be the paper of record. We just cannot do that anymore. And by that, we're not at every meeting. We're not listing, there's more efficient ways to get stock information in real time, traffic information, real time. And we deliver that, of course, on our digital platforms. So what are we if we're not the newspaper of record? We want to be the news source of impact. And so this gets to kind of what we're talking about today. What is our role in a democracy? The quote unquote fourth estate is to make sure that we live up to our First Amendment protection, to be the watchdog, to hold elected leaders accountable, to sort through misinformation, disinformation, to find the truth and become the source of impact. I'm just kind of flashing some headlines here. This is work that we do that makes our community better, that keeps government transparent, that frankly, we just don't get a lot of credit for, but we continue to do it because that is our value proposition. We're in the trending, buzzing news game. We're going to tell you, if Joe Burrow is rumored to be engaged or not. That helps us with our market share. That helps us be relevant, part of the conversation. But that's frankly commodity. And this is where we, like I said, separate ourselves, and I think in an important way. I wanted to linger on this headline just for a second. It's a couple of years old now, but Um, this is the type of journalism that leads to meaningful change, and that only we can do. Especially this particular story was in Portsmouth, which is not really our primary distribution area, but we learned about a former city council member in Portsmouth who was a public defender who was secretly running a prostitution ring. And it worked like this: if you were a young woman in Portsmouth and you got arrested on a minor drug charge or some other misdemeanor, this was the worst kept secret in town. You would be steered towards Mike Moran, and he would make those charges go away because with his connections to judges and police officers. But that meant you went and worked for him as a prostitute. And we were able to, through affidavits we uncovered, interviewing some of his former, I'll just say, clients, did a story that led to his arrest. He died in prison awaiting his trial. But in the meantime, they had to totally clean up that operation. And it was part of a larger problem in rural Ohio, Appalachia, of women, young women especially, that were addicted, being pulled into sex trafficking operations. So that's the level of work that we're committed to doing. In 2018, the Cincinnati Enquirer won the Pulitzer Prize for local news, documenting the opioid epidemic. These are things that that I think demonstrate where we are different and how we continue to use or continue to prioritize this type of information. So that's my little spiel of who we are and how we got here. And just to kind of launch our discussion, this very much plays into how we cover politics. And it's tricky business for us because through the influence of social media, through the influence of 24/7 news on cable, it used to be that, in the good old days, there was serendipity when a newspaper published. It had a little bit of everything. You would read things you agreed with, things that you didn't agree with, whether that be the way a news story was presented or things on the opinion page. But it was generally understood that, we strove for balance, and you were going to see both sides, especially when in terms of political coverage. And that's all lost right now because we either self-select news and information online that aligns with that aligns with our views. So there's a lot of confirmation bias that we're up against. And also just the way the algorithms with social media and search especially work. If I search and I read a couple stories about a particular topic or a particular viewpoint, I am served more of that information rather than, information or things from a different political perspective. So we're feeding into this polarization, and makes it tricky for us. We have gotten, for an example, I wanted to bring up, we no longer endorse candidates for office. And what broke the straw that broke the camel's back in Cincinnati was when the Enquirer, which had historically been in its editorial pages conservative, endorsed Hillary Clinton. And I'm not exaggerating, pretty much lost 30% of its print subscribers with one endorsement. That just tells you how polarized we've become, that we, cancel culture, if you will. We got canceled before canceled was even a word. And this was when I was still at USA Today watching from afar. And it led to that, and other similar situations led to, what is the role of the newspaper when it comes to endorsements. And so we will endorse on issues. We take the time, with like in the last election, the special election issue 1, we came out with an endorsement. We haven't endorsed candidates for a while. What we will do is if they meet with our editorial board, we will write, instead of an endorsement saying who you should vote for, we will make sure you understand who the candidates are, what they stand for, how they where they stand on certain issues, so you can make the decision for yourself. In retrospect, I think it might have been a little arrogant for newspapers historically to say this is who you should vote for. And the newspaper endorsement started back in a time before corporately owned news outlets, when the newspaper in town was owned by someone who had strong party affiliations. So they were foregone conclusions. You knew who the ownership of the newspaper was, what party they belonged to, and you knew how they were going to endorse anyway. And so just to tie a bow on that discussion, when I'm challenged on that, when people say, well, you're copping out, you need to endorse candidates, you need to endorse someone in the presidential election, my response is, because we are a business. That's part of the reason we're able to maintain independence from government, is we're not government supported. We are funded as a private business, or a public business, if you will. That name one business that would knowingly alienate half of its customer base and think that that was a wise idea. So is there a way for us to support the democracy by informing the electorate without alienating half of it? That's the challenge we have in the modern era. And so, our principle of ethical conduct is very specific on the way journalists should behave. You won't see a campaign sign in my yard or anyone that covers news for the Enquirer. We do vote. We encourage reporters, editors to participate in the democracy, but not to campaign and publicly support candidates. I take the somewhat extreme position or tactic. I don't vote in primaries unless there are issues, and I request an issues only ballot, just because in my role, I think it's important that if someone were to look me up, I don't have a D or an R next to my name. And so that is sort of an occupational hazard if you want to make sure that people understand how serious you are in terms of being balanced, seeking the truth, and also admitting that if any journalist were to tell you that they aren't biased, they are lying. We all are biased. We all grew up in families that, influenced how we think and who we are and how we were educated and our life experiences. We're all biased. What we have to do is acknowledge that. And then, because we're professional journalists with that code of conduct, do what we can to mitigate those biases, and be transparent and admit when we get it wrong, because we certainly do get it wrong, and it's constantly evolving. The letter I received, the email I received ahead of tonight, one of the things that she challenged me on was the term, and it's coming from the recent coverage on the sale of the railroad, where we have reported that the board that oversees the railroad has met secretly by going into executive session. And she challenged me. She said, I think that's a loaded word, because secrecy implies some sort of malintent. She said what they did was they met privately. And I understand the nuance there. And so as I thought about why we chose the word secretly, reason we did that is most times when a board or a government elected body or a government appointed body is meeting and they go to executive session, it'll happen during the course of a public meeting, and they will state, we are going to go into executive session because there are things that are covered by Ohio's open meetings law that allow a body like that to go into executive session. Personnel matters, matters involving the sale of real estate, where if they're disclosing everything too early, it could drive up the price and hurt the taxpayers and everything like that. To our knowledge, and there's lawsuits now based on how the Railway Board handled executive session, they met in executive session without telling anybody that they were going into executive session. They just were meeting, and because of the topic they were discussing, they just declared, well, this is executive session. So it was somewhat secret, and it made me think that if we're going to use that word secret rather than met privately, we ought to explain and add the context of why that word was chosen, or avoid that adjective completely, because adjectives are what burn us every time. If we can just simply say they met without notifying the public, or they met under what they believe to be executive session, however, they didn't publicly state, and also in the Ohio open meetings law, you have to state the reason. You just can't say, hey, we're going into executive session. You have to say, we're going into executive session, discuss one of the, you don't have to give the details, but you have to say what it is you're meeting about, to make sure that it is one of those exceptions to the open meeting law. So I value that type of feedback, and it's important that we get into that nuance, especially as we cover potentially controversial topics. We don't want to inadvertently send the wrong message through the words that we use. And when we do that, sometimes the assumption by our critics is that we had, that was our intention. I'm here to tell you, more often than not, it's out of ignorance, or because we're working too fast. We just hadn't thought of it that way. I wish we were as clever as some people claim we are when it comes to our agenda. Our agenda is to get it right, and to be transparent, and acknowledge when we fail in that regard. Our opinion pages are open to anyone that wants to offer an alternative viewpoint, challenge any things we've written, challenge other things that we've published. And we hope that through this back and forth and providing that platform, that one of two things happen: that we inform our voting public, make them see a little bit of a wider view on something than they might naturally have seen, because we have become very narrow in our views sometimes based on how we receive information today, or to let the truth emerge in a way that's harder to do without opening that platform up. So I put a lot out there. Now I'm ready to hear from you. Questions? You want to challenge any of that? No topic is off limits.
Okay, I'd like to ask the first question, Beryl, and I'm going to share my screen just real quick while I do that. Do you recall, and do people recall the graphic that was at the top of the invitation? I'm showing it now on the screen. Did you have any reaction to that, Beryl? Can you hear?
Yeah,
okay.
I can hear.
Okay.
Not really.
Okay. All right. I'm sure it can be interpreted different ways, but here's kind of a way I interpreted it. And I think there are two sides, a left and a right. I think we're more certainly toward the left, if you will, being progressives. And I look at that and I think, gee, here's a newspaper. He's reading the newspaper. It's burning. The city behind him is burning. It's a little late to be looking for the answer to what's going on in the news. uh, why wasn't there something more about that, you know, beforehand that he would have learned? So anyhow, that's how I interpreted that. I thought it was a perfect graphic to bring up for this evening. But in terms of what you said, the balance between your business model and the balance between supporting democracy, I think there has to be some investigation there. In the initial invitation that I sent you, I brought up an article by Jesse Bomer. It was written the day after Trump had been basically found liable for sexual assault. And he met with Marjorie Dannenfelser, the head of the Susan B. Anthony pro-life group. I thought it was the timing was a bit suspicious in terms of it. The point of view was obviously just from their point of view, specifically her point of view. She was interviewed, Marjorie Dannenfelser, and she said it was a terrific meeting. And yet, at the same time in the article, it seemed to point out some differences that they might have had, Trump and Dannenfelser. There was no discussion or presentation about how did they resolve those differences. It was just what I would say a feel-good article that was probably shared many times by people on the right. They probably said, look, this person supports Trump. How great is that? And how strong is he? This type of thing. This is the day after he's been found guilty in a court of law. And I think that says something about supporting democracy. I feel that you have to support our institutions. There has to be some judgment there in doing that. And it's not that you shouldn't share that information, but there might have been a question added. Did they? How were their differences? Trump, for example, said that after a rape, abortions should be allowed. The pro-life group believes abortions should be allowed up to 15 weeks. But there was no, she thought it was a great meeting. Why? Why wasn't, how did they resolve that, for example? Was it resolved? That could just be asked, if nothing else. Jesse could have asked that question and then presented the answer in the article as well. So I think that's our concern. And I go back to the graphic. Why didn't we read? Why wouldn't we thinking about that beforehand rather than waiting until the town and the newspaper are burning? So I'm sorry, that's more of a statement, but not a question. But I think it gets to our concern, my concern, certainly. Any thoughts about that?
So I'm trying to refresh my memory a little bit on the circumstances of that story. It's a couple years old now. And I remember.
No, it's just this May.
Oh, this past May? Okay.
Yeah. Marjorie Dannenfelser met with Trump the day after he was found liable for sexual assault in New York.
So is the question, was our timing, was it about
the timing was suspicious, and I didn't think there was any depth into the presentation of the information. Uh, it was just, this is, it's, if anything, you could say it's a supported First Amendment piece, but it's certainly not uh, a piece that is in any way supportive of a democracy in terms of presenting a point of view. You argue that people should look further. That's all I'm asking for. Should the reporter in this opinion piece have looked further rather than just presenting a point of view?
Yeah, I think that's a fair criticism. I will tell you that it's much more common for us to get criticized by our readers for being merciless towards the former president, looking for every possible reason to drag his name through the mud. Not that he doesn't do that just through his own through his own actions, but I think that story taken in isolation, I absolutely can understand the criticism that you're raising right now. But if I take a step back and put it in context with all the coverage on Trump around that time, before that time, since that time, ideally, it corrects itself, it balances out. And that's, I think, again, a story on a day. I think, depending from your viewpoint, you could definitely say, okay, the timing of this is suspect. There's other stories that could have been done, but when you put it all together as a whole, I think you get a fuller picture of what's going on.
And that's what I question. Are people looking further? But anybody, go ahead, Bruce.
Hey, Beryl. Yeah.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you very much for that presentation. It was very informative. I really appreciate it, and it's pretty amazing what these trends over the last number of years have been, how they affected you all and the rest of us, for that matter. I'd love to learn more about the partnership you have with the Columbus Dispatch and any other news services in the state, because I see that articles are being jointly published by both publications. I get alerts when I see an article, see the same article in both publications, which is just fine. I have no problem with that, but I'd just be interested in the kind of partnerships you develop with other news sources.
Sure, that's a great question. Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a lot there. So 3 years ago, Gannett, the company I've worked for, was acquired and merged with Gatehouse Media, which their largest news operation is the Columbus Dispatch. So we went from about 100 markets to 200 markets. And now that we are a sister publication with the Dispatch, we took the opportunity to combine our state House bureau that covers the governor's office, the state legislature, and some other statewide entities. We had a 2-person bureau. They had about 4, and we merged them to provide state house coverage for our 2 sites and in our sister publications. We have 22 news operations in Ohio, including the Akron Beacon Journal, the Canton Repository, Zanesville, Mansfield, all over the place. So we merged that. So you will see stories shared by the Dispatch and the Enquirer, which has helped us expand that coverage. It's much more state house coverage than the Enquirer was able to do. And I feel like the level of journalism that we do now is deeper and better than what the Dispatch was doing, because they had a very turn of the screw, incremental, here's what the legislature did today, rather than kind of focus in on the big topics that have a lot at stake and doing some accountability journalism. So as we are part of Gannett, our national flagship is USA Today. So we get a lot of national coverage, especially political coverage through USA Today. And then we're also members of the collaborative known as the Associated Press. So that's how we're all networked and together. One of the questions I got ahead of time via email was, do we have any control over the national content that we provide, primarily in print, but also digitally? And the answer is, one of the reasons I've stayed with the company so long is that we have complete autonomy. No one is dictating what our national coverage looks like. Now, because of efficiency and the scale, and because I have more than enough work to do trying to cover greater Cincinnati, I don't spend a lot of time worrying about what the lineup is for the national report that we have. We have a centralized, what we call the wire desk, short for news wires, that's tied to USA Today. And they will put a story list together. And if it's a big story, the first Trump indictment went out on page 1 on the Cincinnati Enquirer that day, because there are stories that, even though we're a local organization, rise to the level that we would be really parochial if we didn't have that on page 1 that day. But I don't spend a lot of time editing those stories, assigning them. I am 100% focused on local, and we take advantage of our national news operation under the USA Today banner to provide that coverage, supplemented by the Associated Press. So that's kind of how that all fits together. Now, I'll give you an example of how I do get involved sometimes. I was getting a lot of feedback from readers that we were ignoring the Hunter Biden story. And that content was available to us. So I sent a note out to the person that puts our wire report together to say, hey, there are readers that are questioning our bias and balance because they feel we're bearing the Hunter Biden story. So please make sure that that is in the national report today. On the other side, there's a lot going on with the Trump indictments. There's something every day. And sometimes there are certain members of our readership, parts of our readership, that think that should be page 1 every day. And it's just not going to be, some of this incremental coverage of the Trump indictments, it's just not going to rise to the level of page 1 every day. It is going to be included inside somewhere. But the fact that we don't put it on page 1 every day, in their view, shows our bias because, quote unquote, we're burying the story. So we're in the middle of that. And when I meet with people, groups that want to talk about bias, it is usually centered around national politics. That's where it lives. Very seldom get into questions of our bias or fairness when it comes to local issues and local politics.
Okay, Sean?
Thank you. I just want to thank you for the increased coverage of what's going on in the State House. I think I've definitely seen much more coverage, much more in-depth coverage with that partnership you have. So I applaud it. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. If you didn't see our coverage of issue 1, both in the news stories, the analysis pieces, and also the op-eds that we published, I was quite pleased with how that turned out. We actually did get some nice reader feedback, which is rare on a political story, as charged as that was, for helping people understand the complexities, where the money was coming from, how it was a veiled referendum on abortion, all of those things. We were able to really get into that more so than any other news source that I saw in the state, including the Plain Dealer and even, like the Capitol Journal, which their bread and butter is here's what happened today at the legislature, as opposed to really digging in um, and helping readers understand what they are voting for, when the ballot language itself doesn't give you much help.
Scott?
Yeah, thanks for coming, Beryl. I'm really glad that you do not endorse candidates. Although years ago, I used to pick up the Sunday Enquirer before the election and look to see who they endorsed and vote the other side. So it was very easy for me if I had any question. My question is, when a decision is made like that, not to endorse, is that your individual decision or is this a group process?
That's a good question. It's definitely a group process. And what we try to do in the news division, which as a regional editor, I have oversight of our sites in Ohio, which puts me on the executive team for the news division of Gannett. Again, it's back to local autonomy on things like that. We do a lot of research. We try to develop some best practices. We try to provide guidance to newsroom leadership in all of our sites, but ultimately it's their decision because we put it in their hands to know what is appropriate for their audience, and no site is quite the same. So I was part of the group that put those best practices together. I was very eager to implement them here. I thought it was the right move for a paper that serves, a blue city, turning more blue county in the middle of very red rural areas. That's our market. That's our readership. If you're the Des Moines Register and you are home of the Iowa caucuses, and historically, not just Iowa, not just Iowans, but the nation has looked to you for that endorsement. It's part of history. The Des Moines Register continued to endorse political candidates or presidential candidates. That was the right decision for them. But no, there's a lot that, we leverage our scale and try to be leaders in the industry in areas like this. But there's very little that comes down as an edict from above because we're just organizationally not set up that way. The leadership of Gannett's news division comes from local editors like me from across the country.
Winnie?
Hi, and yeah, thanks for joining us. And I just wanted to say that I'm so sympathetic to everything you said, and I understand how important papers are to democracy and the difficulties they're encountering. My frustration is I'm a daily print subscriber for national, international news to a big paper based east of us. And I read the Enquirer, mainly for local news. And I had an online subscription and that I get, and it's related to what you were saying. I understand like working with Columbus to cover Ohio news, but I get frustrated. I don't find that much local news. And I was interested in all those examples that you gave. I went, oh, I wish I'd seen all those stories. I missed them. But but I go for local news. And like, for me, the final frustration was a year ago after the Dodd decision, and I participated in pro-choice demonstrations downtown. And then the next day I looked to our local paper to see how they covered the local demonstrations. And I read about demonstrations in Columbus and nationally, but nothing in Cincinnati. And so that kind of bugged me. So I know it's hard to, you serve people that read it for local, state, and national, international news. So I know I there's no solution. I don't know what the solution is, but I'm more interested in local news, and I kind of found maybe it was lacking. I don't look to USA Today for national news. And then another little gripe I have, although nothing to do about it, but you stopped printing the Saturday Enquirer, didn't you?
Mhm.
And the Enquirer prints the New York Times, I believe, right?
No,
Well,
we
well,
did,
at
we
any
don't
rate,
print it. We don't print it. We distribute it.
oh, well, at any rate, right at the time when you stopped your Saturday paper, the New York Times stopped making the Saturday paper available in print locally. You could get it on Sunday, just what
Right.
you want, a Saturday and a
Oh, that's
Sunday
our
paper.
fault because we
Yeah,
stopped delivering the Enquirer on Saturday, and we're not doing any deliveries. The other newspapers that contract with us for local delivery, that affected them as well. So that's why,
yeah.
if you were a subscriber to the Saturday Wall Street Journal or the Saturday New York Times, you're not getting that till Sunday.
Yeah, I hate that, but
I do too. I do too. It was hard enough to pencil out 7-day delivery before the pandemic. After the pandemic, or during the pandemic and after, when fuel costs went up and people just stopped working and felt that they didn't want to go back to work, whether they were waiters and waitresses or a lot of people in the service industry. So we had to double rates that we pay carriers and also subsidize them if they're doing a route that doesn't have as many papers on it anymore. It still has to be worth their while to deliver it, so we can't just really charge or pay them by the copy they deliver. We have to subsidize that, so just got very cost prohibitive, and that was what really expedited the decision, I think, to stop 7-day print delivery. Now, having said that, we don't have immediate plans now to drop the frequency in this market because we do have a significant percentage of people in this market that are still print subscribers. So much that we're going to be looking at, can we because of the deadlines being so early and the limitations on newsprint, is there a way we can, within those parameters, improve the print reading experience? So more to come on that. But that's a different posture than we had 3 years ago when we were, I'll say this because this is a friendly group so far. I feel we did some things that were hastening the demise of our print readership outside of market pressures, just some of the decisions we made. So we're going to try to figure out what is the job, when we have all these platforms at our disposal to deliver news in real time in an efficient way, and not just on the website or through the phone, but through newsletters. You can subscribe to alerts and everything like that. We have platforms that are very efficient for immediacy, but there's probably still a job to be done for the print reader on that platform. And we're going to look at what we can do in that regard.
And I'm sorry, just one more thing.
Yeah.
You made me think of it while you were talking, is I have a wonderful delivery person. He goes above and beyond what he needs to do. So he's great, but I was disturbed when he told me that he has, because I'm sure it's a low paid position. And he told me he has to buy the bags that he puts papers in out of his pocket. And also if somebody reports a missing paper, which sometimes is because somebody steals it, not the fact that he didn't deliver it, then he gets charged. And all of that seems terribly unfair to me.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's a carryover to when the routes were privately owned. they were passed on from family members or sold to other people. It's not the case anymore. And so I
You
don't
went
expect
silent, Beryl.
that practice to last too much longer. I think to retain carriers, we're not going to. They should have used 2 on a rainy day.
There we go. Okay, Ruth, did you have a quick question? You're mute, Ruth.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for your last name. And also that you educated us and got issue 1 through so well. That was very important. Here's my concern. Maybe I speak for everyone, is that this president, whose name I don't want to, the orange-haired president, might get in again. And so here's what because of my nursing background and my own personal history, is there a way we can start teaching people about mental health issues, about diagnosing mental health issues? Because I cannot write a letter to the editor and say sociopath and on the extreme end. I mean, I'm a little sociopathic myself, but I can't do that. But is there a way we could educate people over a period of time, and they would gradually come to see that 1 and 1 and 1 make 3, and that this is not a good choice for us at this time? I don't know how you can do it, but it's important for a lot of things. I mean, a lot of people are sociopathic, and some are wonderful leaders, and they have great gifts on the one side, but not on the other side. They cannot make good decisions for a whole community. So I'm just putting that out there because of my concern, and because I think you're a brilliant person and you've done a great job, and God knows we need some people that can manage this kind of transition, shall we call it. And then one other thing, this is another subject. I think you could put about the printing, etc. I think you could say, well, we're working toward ecology, and, we are really helping the planet, because again, this is, if we don't have a planet we pass on a planet that's dying because of our fuel and because of although paper is recyclable, and that's good, plastic is not, as far as I know. Okay, so those are my 2 big things, and thank you for listening, and please say whatever comes into your heart.
Well, I know we're at time. I don't mind hanging out a little more. I'll share a story with you. So first of all, since I'm the editor of Cincinnati Enquirer, I probably won't be involved in discussions about stories that get into the former president's mental health. Those stories have been done, and they are wielded by people who say we have an agenda against the right when we do those stories. We collectively, national news organizations. When I was at USA Today, before the 2016 election, we were working on a story that looked at his business practices. Did a lot of research, a lot of court records were pulled because there were so many lawsuits against Trump and his empire from small businesses and contractors that weren't getting paid. And we thought we had a very, I don't want to say a smoking gun, but the story, no one had really tackled that story yet. And so we thought it was going to have a major impact on his approval ratings, how he was polling, that it might have been big enough to, change the trajectory of how those primaries were going. Instead, because he came out and said, well, his response was, I don't pay people who do shoddy work. All it did was embolden his supporters and turn them against, at that time, USA Today, and lump us as the liberal press, because, yeah, why would he pay for inferior work? That's what we need, a leader like that. We need someone that's going to stand up to China and stand up to everybody China's. So we're so polarized that one story on the left was celebrated. Great work. See what a, someone with his, with those ethical lapses, somebody that is, pardon my language here, screwing over small business people, doesn't deserve to be elected. That same story emboldened the right. And again, on the extremes, there's a lot of people that kind of live not so far to the left or not so far to the right, but on the extremes of our society, that one story had totally different effects on people based on what I said earlier, the confirmation bias we all look for. For some, it confirmed the fact that the media was out to get Donald Trump. For some, it confirmed the fact that he was a no-nonsense, take no prisoner leader that this country needed. It just depends on your view of the world, on how you reacted to that one story.
Okay.
Maybe just mental health in general.
Yeah, no,
because truly, it's valuable to understand these, at least as much as we understand about mental health. I know we're not, as a field, it's still very young, but it's valuable just in general. Let's keep the orange-haired person out of the picture here, and just in general, it's very valuable, and it's it's coming up a lot. Almost everything I hear, they say, what were the mental health issues? What were his parents like? I know, and we have married Trump, and we have a lot of things so we don't need to say anything more about. Thank you. That's a great.
No, you're welcome. It's a great question.
You mind just one more question, Beryl?
Not at all.
All right. Lucy?
Yeah, hi, thanks, Beryl, for attending the meeting and presenting. I am a subscriber to the Enquirer, the digital subscription. I was very upset this weekend when all I got was national news on, I don't know what day it was, Saturday. There was a little bump.
Yep, that we did.
And I always worry about the paper because I don't know about the future of local papers. Like Winnie, I read the Enquirer for local news and state news, and I love the coverage of Householder in the Enquirer. I thought that did a great job there, and I think there's articles like that I look for. But my question is, sometimes I think, if you look around at us here at this meeting, I question, who is it that's reading the Enquirer or local papers? Do you know much about the demographics of the readership? Because I feel like every young person I know thinks it's funny that I read the Enquirer. They get all their information digitally. None of it's local. I mean, they might read Cincinnati.com, I'm not sure, but I just worry about the future of local papers because of that. And if you know anything about that.
So that's what keeps me up at night. The challenge we have, which I alluded to earlier, is we cannot just simply put that information out there and expect people to go seek it anymore. When we do market research, especially with what we call digital natives, people who have never lived in a time without the internet or a device, and we ask them their source of information, they say Facebook, or they say TikTok, or they say Google. Well, none of those three have any journalists that work for them. They're all content aggregators. And so this same demographic, digital natives, also say, if it's important, I know it's going to find me. Like if the news is important, it will find me. And so we have to preserve the health of our democracy, to preserve what is a local news organization. That's the terms of engagement. We have to just kind of be where people are. So for example, I shared some good numbers with our digital growth. That demographic is reading our content, whether they realize it or not. If they are trying to find information out about, who's on the ballot in November, or, they heard something about a railroad sale and they Google it, or, whatever it is, they heard an ad about issue 1 that said, if you, and I heard this ad, unless you vote for issue 1, the liberals are going to provide sex change for your kids without you, sex change operations for your kids without you knowing about it or having a say in it. Those are the kind of things that people go, what? And they go search online, and we got to make sure they find us. So when I started in this business, we would employ a ton of proofreaders because we committed so much news and information to print every day, and we still have editors, but now we employ people who are experts at SEO, which stands for search engine optimization. So just as vital as it used to be in the past, when all we had to worry about was making sure we didn't any typos sneak through, we have to make sure that our content is optimized for the search engines so that people find our content. So that's the challenge we have, that I think people don't realize, is that we don't control, the main platform used to be print on ink, and we own the press. We don't own the platforms anymore, whether you find us through search, whether you find us on social, however you live your digital life. Those are the platforms that our news and information need to find people on. And it's a challenge. It keeps me up at night because I want people to value local news. But it's up to us to get it to them. We can't just expect people out of habit or because they're civically minded to seek it out. That's what keeps me up at night. And I don't have the answer to that other than I hope what we're seeing is a wild swing of the pendulum towards, only seeking information that validates our viewpoints. I hope we kind of swing back. I hope that high schools get back into the practice of teaching civics and citizenship. And part of that is media literacy. It's a huge problem that we have such a lack of media literacy in our society right now. And when I want to scare people, when I'm speaking to groups, I talk about, if you want to be a dictator, there's 2 things you have to do. 1, you have to control the military. 2nd, you have to control the press. And right now we're letting big tech control the press. And that's the scary thing that keeps me up at night. Man, I don't want to end on such a dire note, though.
No, that's okay.
You don't, big tech doesn't control the military, hopefully.
Hopefully. Although they control the technology that the military uses. So
Right.
we will see. But having said that, the fact that despite all of those challenges, we are thriving. We're not just trying to survive like the first slide that I showed. Once we kind of got through we were kind of on an upswing and doing some reinvestment, and then COVID happened, and then we did some hiring freezes and downsized a little bit. We're kind of through that. We're kind of cycling through some of the business model transitions to the point where I'm able to start reinvesting a little bit in the newsroom this year. So I have optimism, and we had a cohort of interns this summer from, we have someone from Miami University, we had University of Cincinnati, we had Missouri, which has a great school of journalism, Ohio University, which has the Scripps School of Journalism there. And these are some passionate young people that have come out of this, era of splintered fractured news and information and want to be part of the solution. And man, they inspire me, and they're smarter than I'll ever be when it comes to some of this stuff. So I have reason to be optimistic. Otherwise, I'd be fishing somewhere right now.
All right. Beryl, thank you very much. Appreciate your coming and going over with us. Very good.
Thank you.
Any other quick comments?
I love
Thank
what you're
you.
doing with the paper.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you. I'm
Thanks.
tempted to
Thank you.
subscribe again.
Oh,
Thanks, Beryl.
great. Thanks.
There we go.
I'll say the last word I'll say. If from time to time we don't make you angry, we're probably not doing our jobs. So, Please.
You're doing your job.
all right. Hopefully it's not every day, but yeah.
I got your
Because
number.
at any time you read something that you're like, yes, and it delights you, someone else is going to be mad at me that day. So it's just a matter of, can we, when you look at what we're doing as a whole, it goes back to, are we doing our part to preserve the democracy by making sure you know what's going on, period. So thank you for your time tonight, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It is so good to be here.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording here.